This is Austin Liti Limits, where authors talk to authors about books and the craft of storytelling. Sponsored by Blue Ink Review, because typing the end is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Sergio Troncoso. Sergio grew up on the east side of El Paso, the son of Mexican immigrants. He attended Isleta High School, where he was the editor of the school newspaper, graduated from Harvard College, and has 2 graduate degrees from Yale. He writes frequently about issues affecting the people along the Texas-Mexico border. He's won numerous awards for his short stories and his essays, and even has a branch library named after him in El Paso. Sergio is the author of 8 books. His latest is Nobody's Pilgrims.
Welcome to the show, Sergio Troncoso.
Hey, Scott. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Oh, you're welcome. So I read your excellent new novel. You got the picture as well, Nobody's Pilgrims. I'll need to get you to sign it one of these days. So I was reading an excellent profile about you in Texas Monthly recently that our mutual friend, Richard Z. Santos, wrote about you. And you made a comment that I found very interesting. You said that you're still very hungry. And if I get this right, hopefully I get it right, but you're around 60, 61 years old. I'm 51.
Right.
And I found that comment very interesting because I feel I'm more prolific now than I've ever been. Can you, how is writing different for you now compared to when you were a young man?
Well, I think it's different in a lot of ways. I hope I've gotten better at it. That's a question. Sometimes I read some of my early work, a few stories that I still like, and I said, oh God, that was actually pretty good. So I feel like I know more about the craft now than let's say than I did when I was in my 20s and 30s. I think that's different. I think another thing that's different is I have a lot of life experiences that I did not have when I was younger. A lot of things I was imagining, being married or having children and all of that. And I've been through all of that. And I'm happily married, with my wife for 32 years, the ups and downs of marriage. So all of these things help you become a better writer, I think. Even having a difficult, health issue that just cropped up recently, and trying to survive that and surviving that, all of that teaches you something. So I think as a writer, I have that life experience. I hope I've gotten better at craft. And I think the last thing I would say is that when I was younger, I was not confident about my ability. And I'm still not confident about certain of my abilities, but I've now read hundreds, if not thousands, of books. I've taught fiction workshops and given craft talks, and so I don't have, I think, the what I might call that sort of sense that I don't belong anymore, or that I don't know what I'm doing, or that I can't judge a novel or a story, and judge it very specifically and critically, and feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I do feel like I know what I'm doing. I don't know everything, and I want to improve on certain things, but I know a lot more than I did when I was in my 20s and 30s. So I think those 3 things would be very different from how I was at a younger age.
Right. I studied English in college. I got an English degree from University of Texas, but I find myself to be a better reader now. I see things and understand things that I didn't as a younger person. So that definitely, what you're saying means something to me. I recently reread Of Mice and Men. Last time I read it, I was probably 17. And, I understand where they come from as working people. I didn't understand that as a young person. You know, you just see the dynamic between those two characters, but then I saw more than that now. So I imagine you see those kind of things too now as you've gotten older
Oh
in
yeah.
stories.
And in fact, just this morning I finished The Sun Also Rises by Ernest
Okay.
Hemingway. And
Right.
I think the last time I read it was probably 30 years ago.
Right.
And the things I was noticing now are very different. I don't remember noticing the unsaid, for example, which I think is very important in that book. Things that he doesn't say, but that they're in the text or implied, and that's as important as the words that he's writing about, in
Right.
that story. And so that I think that critical ability improves, I think, with age, as long as you keep pushing yourself, keep writing, reading and writing in different ways, and challenging yourself as a writer. So I think I have become a much better reader, and I think much more merciless with my own work, simply because you have all of that reading and taking apart of novels that you didn't have when you were younger. And so I think that definitely has changed the way I read and approach a book.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that book. I mean, he was what, 23 or 24 when he wrote that book. So what did you
Exactly.
take away from that now, reading it later and then realizing, well, he was a very young man
Right.
and so
And
observant.
right. And that's actually why I read it, because I was interested in a first person protagonist, and I was interested in I've always liked Hemingway's style, but I didn't want to read when he was too Hemingway. I wanted to read the very beginning of his
Hmm.
style and how he was looking at the world. And that book is all about observation, this
Yeah.
very, very acute observation. And so for all those reasons, I wanted to read something very old. And now, I'm probably going to read something that was published this year. I'm debating between several books, um, and I'm interested in always comparing styles, comparing what was in vogue and what is not in vogue anymore. Uh, and I don't necessarily discard the classics. I'm simply trying to learn as a writer. So that's
Hmm.
kind of what I took from it. Um, from A Sun Also Rises, and I still love his really beautiful, clean style. It's certainly very clear in terms of what's happening. I think when you look at the prose and towards the end of the novel, which is all about, he's left his friends and he's going to France from Spain, and the fiesta's done. You can see every movement of that character. So the geography and the physicality of that character, I think, is perfectly drawn. I think a lot of writers would learn from just reading those last 15, 20 pages of how you move a body through the world,
Hmm.
with in a very beautiful and you know uh, circumscribed way. I thought he did that really well. So I always feel like I can learn from somebody, and that's why I went back to him. And I wanted to read his very early work just to see, before For Whom the Bell Tolls and all these other writers and that all these other books that he's written, um, before he got to, I guess, studied, because I think that happens to all writers. I feel that you might end up becoming a caricature of yourself, and I think that's something that I want to resist in my own work.
Right.
So
So early on in the adventure with Nolfo and Turi, they find themselves in the Mark Twain National Forest, and Turi realizes, oh, I was reading, Huckleberry Finn for school, and they start talking about it. Can you talk about the connections that you found between Nobody's Pilgrims and Huckleberry Finn? They're both adventures with young protagonists, but what
right.
other connections did you find?
Well, for me, uh, Huck Finn and Duty are both outsiders, and they're also traveling and trying to find themselves through travel in many ways. And and so I also felt, and I've always loved Mark Twain for this, that his stories are exciting, adventurous, and they keep you entertained as a reader, but that's never his ultimate goal, right? His ultimate goal is to suck you into a story and then start talking about some serious issues like racism in the South and unjust laws that a young protagonist like Huck Finn will face. And so that was also my appeal. In Turi, he faces, should he ditch Arnulfo, the undocumented immigrant, when things go haywire, and these bad people are after them, or should he trump what to use that horrible verb now, but should he trump society's disdain for undocumented immigrants for friendship, because friendship matters more to him than what he might have been told. And the same thing goes for Molly, by the way. She's going through these issues as well. So I think that aspect is a connection with Huck Finn, but also Turi loves storytelling. That's who he is. He's a bookworm. He loves to read. And so the connection is also about the effect of books on a character. Turi imagines his world, Connecticut, when he's never been to Connecticut, when he's never traveled there, through books. And he imagines trying to be someone else, trying to reach beyond the border, by going to the library. And Miss Garcia, his librarian teacher at Isleta High School, is the one feeding him books. And I think this imagination is very powerful because it becomes an agent of change. It becomes the reason why he decides on a lark, I'm getting in this truck and I'm going to head to Connecticut, although I don't know anything about it other than in books. So imagination is very powerful for him, just as it was for me as a kid. When I was growing up in Isleta, right on the Mexican border, I traveled in my mind, and those travels had a deep impact on how adventurous I would be, on what chances I would take, even chances in which I really had no clue what I was doing. I was just jumping in to do something, and I had no clue what would happen on the other side. But I jumped in because my imagination told me to do it, because I decided, it's worth that risk, and I know enough, and my imagination has spurred me. So I think that connection to Mark Twain is very important to understand, that it's not just the book itself and the themes of Nobody's Pilgrims and Huck Finn, but it's also the effect of books have on characterization. Mm-hmm. I think the last thing I would say about the connection is that when they start talking about and riffing about Huck Finn, because Arnulfo has not read Huck Finn, and Turi has. He's carrying it in a crate in the back of the truck that they stole. And they start talking about, Turi starts explaining the story of Huck Finn. It is, in a way, keeps them from getting desperate. They're in the forest. They're being pursued by narcos. Terrible things are happening to them. They're about to go bury things to hide from the narcos. And what keeps them level, what keeps them unafraid, are talking about Huck Finn, riffing off Huck Finn, and what could have happened if Huck did this or if Jim did that. And so not even just the story of Huck Finn, but the imagination prompted by a story like Huck Finn. And I think that's what books do to us. They, when we're going through COVID, when we're suffering some horrible things around us, and you read a great story, even if it's a story that's full of danger and possibility, it gives a centering for the self. We don't get afraid. We feel somewhat in control, or at least we're in a book that might uplift us. And that in itself is a help. That's almost as good as having a friend next to you, telling you it's going to be okay. We're going to be reading. We're going to be reading an exciting story, and you're in good hands. And I think that's what the book of Huck Finn does with for Turi and Arnulfo. It centers them in a time when they could easily be panicking and doing stupid things, but instead it brings a certain joy in the middle of this violence and escape that they're trying to do in the inside of the Mark Twain National Forest.
Right. It's funny you mentioned COVID because there's a mysterious virus in your story, but my understanding is that you wrote this story before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So can you go back and tell us like that, what was that initial inspiration, that little nugget that made you think, oh, this is an interesting story I want to dive into?
Well, it's interesting. Is there that nugget? I think in many ways it was a novel I had previously written, From This Wicked Patch of Dust, which is all about Isleta, my growing up on the border. And that's a much more autobiographical novel. It's a family told of, growing up in the border and the good values that that this family gets that help them become American. So I'm a writer that likes to challenge myself. So I said, I'm going to write something about escaping the border, about not, some good things, like Turi has really good values and is a good moral person, but there are also some bad things happening on the border. And Arnulfo is, I think, an immigrant that would bring a lot of value to this country, that he wants to work, he wants to help himself, and he's ready to work. But they're also surrounded by narco traficantes. They're also surrounded by poverty. And so for me, the nugget, if you will, of Nobody's Pilgrims was, I want to write an opposite kind of novel, not a novel about staying in one place and understanding why that place, namely the border, creates or can create in a family great values that are so important for this country and so positive for this country. But I also now want to take it on the road, and I want to write about escaping parts of the border, a difficult family life like Arnulfo has, and Turi has, and people who don't belong to that place. And so it was that nugget of, I want to do something opposite of what I did in From This Wicked Patch of Dust. I want to, get the border beyond the border, and also talk about difficult things that come from the border that some of these characters like Turi, Arnulfo, and Molly are trying to overcome. So I think it was that sort of nugget of I want to do something very different from what I did with From This Wicked Patch of Dust, to engage border issues, and so I think that was a lot of the nugget. And Turi and these characters lived in my head for many years, and different things kept happening, and I also, some people have asked me, especially Midwestern people, because Molly is from Steelville, Missouri, a little tiny town in 2000 with 2,000 people. And some people have asked, well, how did you even get the Missouri dialect? And, how did you know how to write, a character like Molly? And I said, well, they don't know, but for, I think, 9 years, I taught in Independence, Missouri. I taught high school kids
Right.
writing, and a program called the George Caleb Bingham Academy in Independence, Missouri, which I did every summer because a friend of mine, Ron Clemens, ran the program. So I knew a lot of male Mollies and female Mollies that came through my program, and I connected with them because they were poor too. They grew up poor from little places in Missouri. And the working class connection, I think, for me was very powerful. I could see myself, and they saw myself in these kids, because we came from nothing. We didn't have any money, and yet they're white and blonde and blue-eyed. And if you transpose them to Isleta, they would automatically be seen as the highfalutin kids, because Isleta, of course, it was 98% probably Mexican American, the high school, but a blonde and blue-eyed kid would suddenly have a different status, simply
Right.
because of who they are. And of course, and that in itself, there's a dynamic between Tootie and Molly in which Tootie doesn't really, like, she thinks, why would Molly pay attention to me? If he has that mentality from the border, but then he starts finding out the real Molly, and Molly starts finding out the real Tootie, that they both love wordplay and books, and they start seeing themselves beyond these sort of stereotypes, beyond these things that they imagine the other person would be. And I think that's a very important sort of slow simmering connection and finally romance in the novel.
Right. One of the things that Molly does that I found to be a little humorous is she repeats a lot of the Spanish words phonetically, trying to. Did you find people in Missouri curious in that way, or?
Oh yeah, they would love repeating things phonetically, and I would ask them to repeat things that are pronounced differently in Missouri,
Right.
or Missouri, you know, because I'm interested in words, and they would be interested in words, and we would
Right.
have these word games, and that would be our connection. And a lot of it is comes down to curiosity. You know, are you curious about the people in front of you? And so my favorite kids, you know, and these were high school kids, were the ones who were really deeply curious about language. And some of them were taking Spanish, and some of them were, you know, had learned a certain studied Spanish that you learn in school. Then of course they wanted to know the curse words, or you wanted to know, how do you tell this to my girlfriend in Spanish, or my boyfriend in Spanish? And
Right.
you know, the stuff that teenagers are really interested in.
Right.
And so I would tell them, this is what you would say in Spanish, you know, if you want to wow them. And they'll say, oh my gosh, where did you get that from? You know, really sort of romantic line that you could do on your boyfriend or girlfriend in Spanish. And so I think for me, the curiosity and the wordplay was always a very deep and ongoing connection with many of these students.
Can you tell us about a book you've read lately that really blew you away?
Well, I love, I would say Lincoln in the Bardo. I was going to say, you know,
Oh, okay.
you know, I love George Saunders, and I've read many. I think he's the best short story writer in existence now. And I've gotten to know a little bit George Saunders. As president of the TIL, we inducted him 2 years ago. I think my first year when I was president. And so I got to exchange some emails with him. And for me, it was like total fanboy, very excited. And he was such a great guy, such a friendly person. But Lincoln in the Bardo, I was expecting good writing, because that's George Saunders. But I think what I got was much more than that. This experimentation on the novel form that was very driven by almost like writing it for a play, or maybe it was written as a play. And I thought it blew me away, because any writer that can do something new on the form that I love, or that I'm trying to learn more about, is teaching me something. And I felt George Saunders was really opening up a new sense of the novel form, and even how to create characters in this sort of long format. So I was expecting good writing. What I was not expecting, but what I got was a great experimentation on this new long form, even a new way to write a novel. And so I would say, you know, when you asked me, blew me away. You know, very few things blow me away, but Lincoln in the Bardo did.
Right. Excellent. All right. Well, now's the time in the show for our lightning round. It's a concept we stole from inside the Actors Studio, but it's not their concept. They stole it from Bernard Pivot, who stole it from Marcel Proust, and it goes on and on and on.
I am ready.
All right, Sergio Troncoso, are you ready for the lightning round? Excellent. So what's your favorite word?
Rascuache.
Excellent. What is your least favorite word?
Monkeypox.
Oh boy, you're right. What turned you on?
Curiosity.
And what turned you off?
Vanity.
Excellent. What is your idea of happiness?
Peaceful reading with the love of my family all around me.
Well, that sounds nice. Who's your favorite author?
It's George Saunders.
Oh, excellent. All right. If you could be a character from any well-known novel throughout history, who would that be?
Well, I'm going to say something popular, Hermione Granger. You know,
Okay.
she's intelligent, she's brave, and she can fly around in a broom.
That's
So I
right.
think that's exciting.
That
New
sounds exciting.
perspective.
Right. What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
This might shock some people, but money manager. I used to be an economist before I was a writer, and I'm very good with
Oh,
numbers. So,
excellent. What's a profession you would least want to do?
politician.
Right.
And I came very close to being a politician, but I
Hmm,
feel like I count my lucky stars every time I decided not to go in that direction.
I agree. All right. Last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
So I thought about this a lot, and I'm going to say it very quickly. You have the ability to read and to speak in any language, Sergio, and we have a library of all the books written in existence in any language. And Friedrich Nietzsche is giving a craft talk at 7 right after the buffet.
Excellent.
So if God said that to me, I think that's heaven.
You'd be happy, huh?
Right.
All right, Sergio Troncoso's excellent new book, Nobody's Pilgrims, out. Thanks for being on our show.
Thank you, Scott.
This has been a presentation of Austin Liti Lemons, made possible with help from our good friends at Blue Ink Review, where typing "the end" is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com.